The great chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with nervous energy. 47 different species filled the massive hall, their voices creating a symphony of clicks, hums, and melodic tones that the translation devices worked overtime to convert into understandable speech. The air recyclers struggled to accommodate the mix of atmospheric preferences, creating swirling patterns of different colored gases that marked the breathing zones for each delegation. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat quietly in the defendant's chair, at the center of the chamber. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the standard navy blue uniform of the Human Diplomatic Corps. 2 junior diplomats flanked her, both looking far more nervous than their superior. Chen's hands rested calmly in her lap as she watched the proceedings with patient eyes. Chancellor Vextar of the Zenith Collective rose from her elevated platform. Her crystalline form caught the chamber's lights and threw rainbow patterns across the walls. When she spoke, her voice resonated through the hall like wind chimes in a storm. This emergency session has been called to address the ongoing problem of human membership in our council, Vextar announced. For too long, we have tolerated behavior that undermines the stability and order we have worked centuries to achieve. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The snake-like Sith delegates bobbed their heads in unison. The insectoid Kythera clicked their mandibles approvingly. Even the peaceful Melodians hummed notes of support. The charges against humanity are numerous and well documented, Vextar continued, activating a holographic display. First, excessive aggression. Human military forces consistently exceed recommended force levels in conflict resolution. Second, unpredictable behavior patterns that make diplomatic planning impossible. Third, disregard for established protocols in favor of emotional decision-making. The display showed statistics, battle reports, and diplomatic incidents. Each data point painted humans as dangerous wildcards in an otherwise orderly galactic. Community Representative Tulmora of the Rigel Consortium stood to add his voice. His massive whale-like form dominated his section of the chamber. My people have worked closely with humans for decades, he said, his voice deep and resonant. While we acknowledge their contributions, we cannot ignore the constant disruption they bring to established procedures. Their so-called innovations often ignore safety protocols, added Speaker Naresh of the Vorthon Union, her bird-like features animated with concern. They take risks that endanger not just themselves but entire operations. Chen remained silent, her expression unchanged as speaker after speaker rose to catalog humanity's supposed failures. They spoke of human tendency to form inappropriate, emotional bonds across species lines. They mentioned how human traders often ignored profit margins to help struggling colonies. They criticized human explorers for venturing into dangerous regions despite clear warnings. Most concerning, Vextar, said, her crystal form shifting to a deeper blue, is their inability to accept that some problems cannot be solved. They persist in attempting the impossible, creating chaos where order should prevail. The hegemony of Keth's representative, General Mortak, projected an image of imposing authority even while seated. Human military advisors consistently propose strategies that violate basic tactical doctrine. They suggest alliances with species we have never successfully negotiated with. They recommend mercy when strength is required. Their research methods are equally problematic, observed Chief Scientist Velkana of the Academic Worlds. They combine fields that should remain separate. They collaborate with species whose biological makeup makes such cooperation theoretically impossible. They publish papers that other species cannot replicate because they rely on intuitive leaps rather than proper methodology. One by one, the accusations mounted. Humans were too emotional, too willing to sacrifice efficiency for fairness, too likely to help others even when it cost them personally, too ready to question authority when they believed it was wrong. Chen finally stood when given the opportunity to respond. The chamber fell silent, 47 species waiting to hear humanity's defense against the charges that would determine their fate in galactic society. Honorable Chancellor and esteemed representatives, she began, her voice clear and steady. We have listened to your concerns. We understand your position. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with representatives she had worked with for years. Some shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. Others maintained their stern expressions. You believe we are too aggressive, yet you call upon human forces when conflicts arise that your own militaries cannot resolve. You claim we are unpredictable, yet you rely on human negotiators when standard diplomatic channels fail. You say, we ignore protocols, yet you implement solutions we develop when your established methods prove insufficient. The chamber remained silent. Chen continued. You speak of our emotional decision-making as a weakness, but it was human emotions that convinced the Ikari and Zenthi to end their 1,000-year war. Our inappropriate cross-species bonds created the first successful joint ventures between your peoples. Our impossible research has provided technologies that improved life for billions across the galaxy. Her voice never rose. Her tone remained professional and calm. But we understand that our presence makes you uncomfortable. We accept that our methods do not align with your preferred order. Therefore, we will comply with your decision without protest or delay. Vexitar's crystalline form flickered with surprise. You do not contest this ruling? No, Chancellor. We do not. You do not request a delay for transition planning? We have already begun preparations. All human personnel will withdraw from Council space within 6 months, not the full year you have granted us. Whispers started throughout the chamber. This was not the response they had expected. Where were the angry speeches? The threats? The desperate bargaining? Chen gathered her papers and nodded to her aides. We will coordinate our departure through existing diplomatic channels to minimize disruption. All joint projects will be transferred to Council oversight with full documentation. She turned to leave, then paused. We thank the Council for the years of cooperation and wish you success in your future endeavors. As the 3 humans walked toward the exit, Representative Goltar of the mining guilds called out, Ambassador Chen, surely you wish to argue for reconsideration. Chen stopped but did not turn around. No, Representative Goltar. You have made your decision based on your values and priorities. We respect that decision. But the economic implications alone will be addressed in our transition documents. Chen interrupted gently. All current contracts will be honored through completion or mutual agreement for early termination. No species will suffer financial loss due to our departure. The chamber doors closed behind the human delegation with a soft hiss. For several moments, the assembled representatives sat in silence. Somehow, the easy victory felt hollow. Chancellor, Vextar called for the vote to be officially recorded. All in favor of confirming the expulsion of humanity from the Galactic Council? 47 hands, claws, tentacles, and appendages rose in unanimous agreement. As the session adjourned, small groups of representatives lingered in the chamber, discussing the unexpected ease of the proceedings. The Melodians harmonized their confusion in minor keys. The Sith delegation debated whether they should have expected more resistance. The Vorthon representatives wondered aloud why they felt uneasy about their decisive victory. In her private office, Chancellor Vextar reviewed the session recordings. She had expected drama, passion, perhaps even threats. Instead, she had witnessed something that disturbed her more than any angry outburst could have. Complete acceptance. She tried to push away the nagging thought that humans had agreed too readily, too calmly, as if they had been expecting this outcome, as if they had been prepared for it. But that was impossible. The vote had been unanimous. The decision was clearly correct. Soon, the galaxy would return to the peaceful, predictable order it had enjoyed, before humanity's disruptive influence. Vextar filed the session recordings and began drafting the formal announcement. Within days, every world in Council space would know that the age of human unpredictability was over. She had no way of knowing that in 6 months, she would desperately wish she could take back every word of that announcement. The evacuation began exactly as Ambassador Chen had promised. No protests filled the streets. No angry demonstrations disrupted spaceports. No sabotage damaged critical infrastructure. Humans simply packed their belongings and left. One transport at a time, with the same quiet efficiency they had brought to everything else. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in his laboratory aboard Kepler Station, carefully removing data crystals from the quantum resonance array. The massive research facility orbited a neutron star, its position allowing for experiments impossible anywhere else in known space. For 15 years, Webb had worked here alongside scientists from a dozen different species, pushing the boundaries of physics and engineering. His Vorthan colleague, Dr. Thelnara, watched from the doorway with growing anxiety. Her feathered crest twitched with nervous energy as Webb disconnected another component. "Marcus, you cannot simply take the quantum calibration system," she said, her translated voice carrying an edge of desperation. "That equipment is integral to the station's operations." Webb looked up from his work, his weathered face showing no anger or resentment. "Actually, Thel, I can. This entire array was built using specifications I developed. The calibration techniques were never officially transferred to Council databases, but surely the plans were in my personal files, which I'm taking with me." Webb resumed his careful disconnection of the crystals. "Remember when Director Colvin said my documentation methods were obsessively detailed and inefficient? He preferred that we keep everything in our heads rather than cluttering the official records." Thelnara's crest flattened against her skull. "But how will we maintain the array without your expertise?" "You'll figure it out," Webb said without malice. "The Vorthan are brilliant scientists. You'll develop your own methods." Similar conversations played out across the station. In the engineering bay, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez finished packing the custom tools she had fabricated for maintaining the station's fusion reactors. The replacements worked fine for standard operations, but when unusual problems arose, only Rodriguez seemed able to jury-rig solutions from spare parts and determination. In the hydroponics labs, Dr. Kim gathered her notebooks filled with growing techniques she had developed for feeding the station's diverse population. Each species had different nutritional requirements, and standard council guidelines provided adequate but bland nutrition. Kim had spent years learning to grow foods that satisfied not just biological needs, but also the cultural and emotional connections each species had to their traditional cuisines. "You're taking the flavor enhancement protocols?" asked botanist Zulkar of the hegemony, his insectoid features expressing confusion. "They're based on my grandmother's gardening techniques combined with xenobiology research I conducted in my spare time," Kim replied, sealing another container of seeds. "Feel free to develop your own approaches." Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated. On mining stations, human engineers packed up their improvised solutions for extracting rare minerals from impossible asteroid compositions. In diplomatic stations, human mediators collected their personal notes on interspecies psychology and cultural interpretation. On exploration vessels, human navigators took their star charts of routes through spatial anomalies that computer models said couldn't be traversed. The other species initially felt relief. Finally, they could return to established procedures and proven methods. Regulations would be followed properly. Safety protocols would be observed without question. Research would proceed through appropriate channels without chaotic human improvisation. Captain Zekthar of the merchant fleet watched the last human transport leave Sigma Station with satisfaction. "Good riddance," he muttered to his first officer. "Now we can run shipping operations by the book instead of constantly adapting to human creativity." His first officer, a methodical algorithmic intelligence named Unit 7742, processed this statement. "Captain, preliminary analysis suggests possible complications. Human logistics coordinators handled 17% of our most challenging route optimizations." "The computers can handle route optimization," Unit 7742. "That's what they're for." "Affirmative, Captain. However, human coordinators specialized in routes that computer models classified as impossible or inadvisable. These routes comprised 31% of our most profitable runs." Zekthar's mandibles clicked with annoyance. "Then we'll find new routes, more logical ones." But as weeks passed, finding those new routes proved more difficult than expected. The logical alternatives were either controlled by competing fleets or passed through regions where pirates operated. The human routes had seemed almost magical in how they avoided both problems while maintaining efficient delivery schedules. On Tralac 7, agricultural supervisor Colvin congratulated himself on finally running the farming operations without constant human interference. Dr. Susan Okafor had been a pleasant enough colleague, but her habit of making unauthorized adjustments to the atmospheric processors had been a source of constant concern. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks after Okafor's departure. The atmospheric readings in Dome 7 began showing minor fluctuations. Nothing dangerous, just small variations that fell within acceptable parameters. Colvin ordered the automated systems to correct the deviations. The corrections worked, but the fluctuations returned within days. Each time, the automated systems compensated, and each time, the variations came back slightly worse. By the end of the month, Dome 7's atmosphere required constant monitoring and adjustment. Did Dr. Okafor leave any notes about these fluctuations? Colvin asked his assistant. She mentioned them in her daily reports, supervisor. She said the dome's microclimate created unique conditions that required continuous fine-tuning, and her solution? Manual adjustments based on daily observations. She said the atmospheric processors needed personal attention to maintain optimal growing conditions. Colvin's leafy exterior rustled with frustration. Personal attention wasn't a scientific methodology. It wasn't something that could be programmed or systematized. It was exactly the kind of unstructured approach that made human methods so problematic. Yet Dome 7 had consistently produced the highest yields on the planet under Okafor's chaotic management style. In the hegemony of Keth's military academy, General Mortak reviewed the latest training reports with growing concern. For months he had complained about human tactical advisors and their disregard for established military doctrine. Their strategies relied too heavily on unpredictable variables and emotional manipulation of enemy forces. Now, with human advisors gone, his forces had returned to proper tactical planning. Every scenario was analyzed mathematically. Every strategy followed proven doctrines. Every operation proceeded according to established military wisdom. The results were disappointing. In simulation after simulation, hegemony forces performed adequately but never excellently. Their strategies were sound but predictable. Enemy forces seemed to anticipate their moves with troubling accuracy. "Sir," his aide reported, "the fringe raiders have successfully ambushed 3 of our patrol groups this month. How is that possible? Our patrol routes follow optimal spacing for maximum coverage." "Yes, sir, but the raiders appear to be using non-standard tactics. They're attacking in patterns that our doctrine considers illogical." Mortak's jaw tightened. The fringe raiders had been a minor annoyance for years, easily contained by standard military responses. When human advisors had been present, raider attacks had been virtually eliminated through what humans called thinking outside the box. He had dismissed such tactics as unprofessional and chaotic. Now he wondered if there was more to them than he had understood. Reports from across Council space began painting a troubling picture. The Centauri Trade Alliance experienced shipping delays as pilots struggled with routes that human navigators had made seem routine. Medical stations found themselves unable to treat certain interspecies medical emergencies that human doctors had handled with apparent ease. Research facilities discovered that critical experiments could no longer be replicated without human researchers who had somehow made incompatible species work together effectively. Most disturbing were the reports from the galactic rim. Human colonies that had been established outside Council space were not just surviving their isolation, they were thriving. Trade ships brought back stories of technological innovations, successful terraforming projects, and peaceful cooperation between species that Council scientists insisted were incompatible. "Impossible," declared Chief Science Advisor Melkaran during a closed session of the Council leadership. "Those species cannot coexist. Our xenobiological studies prove it." "Yet the reports are consistent," Vextar replied, studying the data. "Streams. Human settlements are successfully integrating Ikari thermal engineers with Zenthi Ice World specialists. They're creating joint ventures between crystalline collective members and flesh-based alliance species." "Propaganda," suggested General Mortak. "Humans are trying to make us doubt our decision." But Vextar wasn't convinced. The reports came from independent traders, not human sources. More troubling, some of those traders were requesting permission to establish permanent trade routes with human space, claiming the profits were too good to ignore. In the Outer Rim territories, Captain Zara Okonkwo supervised the low 1 year after the last human transport vanished into hyperspace. Chancellor Vextar stood before the assembled council to deliver her annual address. The great chamber gleamed. With fresh renovations, the air was perfectly regulated for optimal comfort, and the representatives sat in orderly rows that would have made any bureaucrat proud. Fellow beings, she began, her crystalline form radiating confidence. We have successfully entered a new era of stability and cooperation. The disruptions of the past are behind us. The galaxy operates now according to proven principles and established wisdom. Polite harmonics of approval echoed through the chamber. The past year had indeed seen fewer conflicts, more predictable outcomes, and adherence to proper procedures across council space. It should have felt like a triumph. The speech was interrupted by an urgent communication beacon flashing red above the central podium. Emergency protocols activated and a holographic figure materialized. Director Cole Mantis of the Rigel Mining Consortium, his usually composed demeanor replaced by barely controlled panic. Chancellor, Honored Council, we have a catastrophic situation developing in the Rigel system. Our primary extraction operations have suffered complete system failure. Confused murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Rigel mines were among the most advanced in the galaxy, providing essential rare elements for dozens of worlds. Explain the nature of this failure, Vextar commanded. The asteroid field designated Rigel 7 contains mineral compositions that our standard extraction equipment cannot process. For the past decade, we've relied on custom modifications developed by human engineering teams. These modifications were informal, not properly documented in our official systems. The chamber fell silent. Director Cole Mantis continued, his voice strained. When the human engineers departed, they took their personal notes and techniques with them. We assumed our regular equipment could handle the extraction. We were wrong. The asteroids contain mineral matrices that require specialized approaches. Without the human modifications, our equipment fails within hours. Surely your own engineers can reverse engineer the necessary modifications, suggested Representative Thulmora. We've been trying for 3 months. The human solutions don't follow standard engineering principles. They're based on intuitive understanding of metal stress patterns and chemical interactions that we cannot replicate through normal analysis. Vextar felt a cold sensation spreading through her crystal matrix. What is the immediate impact? 17 worlds are already experiencing energy shortages. If we cannot resume extraction within the next month, we're looking at complete power grid failures across the Rigel trade zone. As the mining crisis dominated emergency discussions, reports of other problems began filtering in from across council space. Agricultural Supervisor Colvin on Trelax 7 submitted a formal request for disaster relief. The farming domes that had produced surplus food for 3-star systems were operating at 60% efficiency. The atmospheric processors require constant manual adjustment, his report explained. Dr. Okafor made these adjustments daily, treating each dome as a unique ecosystem. Our automated systems can maintain basic operations, but cannot adapt to the micro-variations that occur naturally in any living environment. What Colvin didn't mention in his official report, but whispered to his closest aides, was that he had found Okafor's personal notebooks in her abandoned quarters. They contained thousands of observations about plant behavior, soil chemistry variations, and atmospheric fluctuations. Reading them, he realized that she hadn't just been making random adjustments, she had been conducting an ongoing conversation with the ecosystem itself, responding to signals that the automated systems couldn't even detect. The notebooks were written in a mixture of scientific notation and personal shorthand that made them impossible to fully decode. Worse, they revealed that many of the standard procedures the facility used had actually been quiet modifications Okafor had implemented over the years, each one solving a small problem before it became a crisis. Military reports brought even more troubling news. General Mortak of the hegemony of Keth faced his first military defeat in 3 centuries. The Fringe Raiders, previously contained through predictable patrol patterns, had somehow evolved into a coordinated threat that consistently outmaneuvered hegemony forces. Their tactics make no logical sense, Mortok reported to the Defense Council. They attack when they should retreat when they should attack, and coordinate their movements in patterns that violate basic strategic principles. Yet they're winning, observed Admiral Sectora of the Fleet Command. Yes, somehow their illogical approach is more effective than our proven strategies. Mortok didn't admit that he had spent sleepless nights reviewing old battle reports from when human advisors had been present. Those reports showed raider attacks being neutralized through equally illogical human counter-strategies. Human tactical suggestions that had seemed chaotic and unprofessional at the time, but had somehow always worked. Trade disruptions compounded the growing problems. Captain Zekthar of the merchant fleet found his shipping routes increasingly unreliable. Computer-optimized paths that should have been more efficient than the chaotic human-planned routes proved vulnerable to pirates, spatial anomalies, and political complications that somehow hadn't been problems before. The mathematical models are perfect, his navigation officer insisted. These routes are 30% more efficient than the previous pathways. Then why are we losing 20% of our cargo to raiders? Zekthar demanded. The answer came from an unexpected source. A veteran dock worker on Cargo Station 5 offered an explanation that chilled Zekthar to his core. The human route planners didn't just calculate distances and fuel efficiency. They talked to people. They knew which systems were having political troubles, which sectors had increased raider activity, which stations were offering protection services. They built relationships. Relationships are not logistics parameters, Zekthar protested. Maybe not, the dock worker replied, but they kept cargo safe. The most disturbing reports came from the Galactic Rim, where human colonies continued to expand and prosper. Independent observers described technological innovations that surpassed anything in Council space. Terraforming projects that turned barren worlds into gardens in record time. Energy generation systems that operated at impossible efficiency levels. Dr. Velkana of the academic worlds attempted to analyze these reports scientifically. The described technologies violate established principles, she announced during a closed council session. These claims must be exaggerated. But the evidence kept mounting. Trade vessels returned with samples of human-manufactured goods that outperformed council equivalents in every measurable category. Scientists who had worked with humans reported that their former colleagues were publishing research papers in independent journals, describing breakthroughs that council institutions couldn't replicate. Most disturbing of all were reports of successful cooperation between species that council xenobiologists insisted were incompatible. Human settlements hosted joint ventures between the fire-breathing Pyrothians and the ice-dependent cryogenics. They facilitated partnerships between the individualistic solitary minds and the hive-minded collective consciousness species. It's impossible, Velkana insisted. The biological and psychological barriers are insurmountable. Yet it's happening, Chancellor Vextar replied, staring at verified reports from multiple independent sources. Late at night, in the privacy of her chambers, Vextar began reviewing archived files from humanity's early days in the Council. She found the original membership proposal, written 127 years earlier by Chancellor Morgethus, long since deceased. The proposal's language made her crystal form dim with growing dread. Humans possess a unique gift for solving impossible problems and bridging unbridgeable gaps. Their chaotic approach to problem-solving complements our structured methods. Their emotional intelligence allows them to understand and work with species we have never successfully collaborated with. Their willingness to attempt the impossible has led to breakthrough innovations that our methodical approaches could never achieve. The proposal continued. We need their chaos to temper our order. We need their emotional insight to balance our logical analysis. We need their stubborn refusal to accept that some problems cannot be solved. Vextar realized with horror that she had never read the full proposal before voting to expel humanity. She had only reviewed the summary reports that focused on human disruptions and complications, not the analysis of their contributions. She accessed more archived files, discovering decades of reports that painted a very different picture of human involvement in council affairs. Crisis after crisis had been resolved through human intervention. Impossible negotiations had succeeded because human diplomats refused to accept that they were impossible. Scientific breakthroughs had emerged from human willingness to combine fields that should have remained separate. The pattern was clear and terrifying. Humans hadn't been causing problems for the Council. They had been preventing problems that no one else could solve. As reports of system failures, diplomatic breakdowns, and technological 3 years had passed since the humans departed, and the galaxy was dying. The first major collapse came from an unexpected direction. The Centauri Trade Alliance, backbone of galactic commerce for over 2 centuries, simply stopped functioning. Shipping routes that had operated smoothly for decades became impassable, as spatial anomalies that human pilots had navigated with casual confidence proved impossible for other species to traverse. Captain Zekthar sat in his grounded freighter on Nexus Station, staring at navigation charts that might as well have been written in an alien language. The computer models showed clear paths through the Maelstrom sector, but 3 ships had been lost attempting those routes in the past month. How did they do it? He asked his navigation officer for the 100th time. The humans flew through that sector daily. Our sensors show nothing but deadly gravity wells and radiation storms. Unit 7742 processed the question with mechanical precision. Analysis suggests human pilots relied on intuitive understanding of stellar mechanics rather than computational models. They appear to have developed an empirical feel for gravitational fluctuations that cannot be quantified through standard sensors. That's not science. That's not navigation. That's... Zekthar struggled for words. Magic? Unit 7742 suggested, with artificial intelligence irony. Without the Centauri routes, trade between the core worlds and the outer rim became prohibitively expensive. Planets that had relied on imported goods for generations found themselves isolated. The economic ripple effects cascaded through every system in Council space. The plague started small, a minor outbreak on a research station in the Vega system, affecting only a few individuals from different species. Standard medical protocols should have contained it easily. But this plague was unlike anything in Council medical databases. It jumped between species with different biochemistries, adapting to each new host in ways that violated established epidemiological principles. Dr. Keltoris, the station's chief medical officer, worked frantically with his multi-species team to develop a cure. The pathogen modifies itself for each species it encounters, he reported to Medical Command. We need a treatment that can adapt to 17 different biochemistries simultaneously. Impossible, came the reply from Chief Medical Advisor Parnala. No cure can be effective across such diverse biological systems. Dr. Elena Vasquez did it before, Keltoris said quietly. 3 years ago, during the Sirius outbreak, she created a synthesis treatment that worked on 12 different species. How? I don't know. Her methods were classified as experimental and unscientific by the Medical Review Board. They refused to approve her techniques for standard use. The plague spread. Within months, it had jumped to 6 different systems. Each planet's medical establishment tried to develop species-specific treatments, but the pathogen evolved faster than their research could progress. Worlds began implementing quarantine procedures, cutting themselves off from galactic civilization to prevent further spread. Meanwhile, reports filtered in from the border regions of human space. The same plague had appeared there briefly, before being completely eliminated within weeks. Human medical teams had somehow developed a universal treatment that worked across all known biochemistries. Council medical advisors demanded access to the human cure. The response came through diplomatic channels. Our medical research is proprietary to the Free Human Worlds Alliance. We cannot share classified technologies with foreign governments. Foreign governments. That phrase stung more than any insult could have. Military disasters followed close behind medical ones. The ancient hatred between the Yikari Empire and the Zenthi Republic, dormant for 2 centuries, erupted into open warfare. For generations, human diplomats had maintained peace between these species, through what other council members had dismissively called emotional manipulation and unscientific psychology. Without human mediators, negotiations broke down within hours. The Waikari delegates, with their emphasis on personal honor and dramatic gestures, found the methodical Zenthi approach insulting and cold. The Zenthi representatives, who valued logical discourse and measured responses, interpreted Yikari passion as threatening and unstable. Ambassador Felkareth of the neutral zones attempted to mediate using standard diplomatic protocols. The first session ended with both delegations walking out in offense. "How did the humans make this work?" Felkareth asked his staff in desperation. His aide consulted archived records. Human Ambassador Rodriguez typically began sessions with informal conversations about family and personal interests. She would spend hours learning about each delegate's individual background and concerns before addressing policy issues. That's not diplomacy. That's... Felkareth paused, realizing he was about to call it inefficient, just as the council had done for decades. That's time-consuming. Yes, but it worked. Ambassador Rodriguez maintained peace between these species for 23 years. The war escalated rapidly. Both species possessed advanced military technology and deep strategic knowledge. Their conflict spread across 7 star systems, disrupting trade, destroying infrastructure, and creating refugee crises that council humanitarian organizations couldn't handle. Human settlements offered assistance to refugees from both sides, accepting millions of displaced persons without regard to species or political affiliation. Council representatives protested this interference in internal affairs, but couldn't provide alternative solutions for the humanitarian crisis they had failed to prevent. The most catastrophic failure was yet to come. The Great Network, the quantum communication system that linked all council worlds, began showing signs of instability. Messages took longer to transmit. Data corruption increased. Connection reliability dropped from near perfect to merely adequate. Chief Network Engineer Zolfaris frantically reviewed the system specifications, trying to understand what was happening. The quantum entanglement stabilizers were operating within normal parameters. All standard maintenance procedures were being followed correctly, yet the network continued to degrade. "Sir," his assistant reported, "I've found something troubling in the archived maintenance logs." The logs revealed that Dr. James Park, the human engineer who had originally designed the network's stabilization system, had been making daily micro-adjustments to the quantum field generators. Adjustments that weren't part of standard procedure. Adjustments that had never been officially documented because they were considered experimental and outside approved methodology. "He was improvising?" Zolfaris asked in horror. "Every day, sir. The quantum fields require constant fine-tuning to maintain coherence across galactic distances. Dr. Park had developed an intuitive understanding of field fluctuations that allowed him to make preemptive corrections. And his replacement? Following standard procedures exactly, but standard procedures assume stable quantum fields. The fields are never actually stable. They just appeared stable because Dr. Park was constantly adjusting them. Without those daily adjustments, the quantum entanglement that made instantaneous galactic communication possible was slowly unraveling. The network that had bound galactic civilization together for 3 centuries was dying, one quantum link at a time. System after system reported communication failures. Worlds found themselves cut off from galactic commerce, unable to coordinate responses to local crises, isolated in ways they hadn't experienced since the primitive pre-network era. In her private chambers, Chancellor Vextar accessed the most classified files in council archives, the original assessment reports written when humanity first made contact with galactic civilization. The documents painted a picture that filled her with growing dread. Humanity appears to possess an unusual psychological trait, one report noted. They consistently attempt solutions that mathematical analysis suggests should not work. Yet their success rate with impossible problems exceeds statistical probability by orders of magnitude. Another report observed, human approach to interspecies cooperation defies established xenopsychological principles. They form emotional connections across biological barriers that should make such relationships impossible. These connections enable collaborative efforts that formal diplomatic structures cannot achieve. The most damning assessment came from the Council's own efficiency experts. Human involvement in any project increases complexity and reduces predictability. However, it also increases success rates, innovation levels, and long-term sustainability by statistically significant margins. Recommendation: tolerate human chaos for the benefits it provides. That recommendation had been filed and forgotten. The Council had focused on the chaos and ignored the benefits. Reports from human space painted a stark contrast to Council territories. The Free Human Worlds Alliance had not only survived their expulsion, but had attracted dozens of species that had never been part of the Galactic Council. The Wanderer fleets, the independent colonies, the frontier settlements, all were requesting membership in humanity's new alliance. Trade vessels brought back descriptions of technologies that seemed almost magical. Human engineers were building ships that could travel through dimensions Council scientists insisted didn't exist. Human doctors were curing diseases that Council medical establishments had classified as incurable. Human terraformers W. 5 years after the Exodus, the once mighty Galactic Council met in chambers that felt more like a tomb than the center of interstellar civilization. Only 11 species remained as active members. 17 others had formally withdrawn to pursue separate agreements with human space. The rest had simply stopped responding to Council communications as their own civilizations struggled with system-wide failures. Chancellor Vextar looked out at the sparse assembly with crystal formations that had dulled from their once brilliant shine. Where 47 species had once debated the future of the galaxy, now barely enough representatives remained to achieve quorum for basic decisions. The holographic display showed the current state of what had once been Council space. Red zones marked systems with failed infrastructure. Yellow indicated regions with severe resource shortages. Blue showed areas that had lost contact entirely. Only a few scattered green dots remained, isolated pockets of stability in an ocean of decline. Outside the chamber's massive windows, the space around Nexus Prime told its own story. Where hundreds of ships had once docked daily, bringing trade and diplomacy from across the galaxy, now only occasional vessels arrived. Many were refugees seeking passage to human space, hoping to escape the cascading failures that had consumed their homeworlds. An alert chimed through the chamber. A ship was requesting landing permission, but not seeking it. The message was formal and brief. Former Ambassador Sarah Chen of the Free Human Worlds Alliance requests an audience with the Galactic Council. Landing Bay 7 has been prepared for our arrival. Murmurs of surprise and hope echoed through the chamber. After 5 years of silence, humanity was making contact. Perhaps they had reconsidered. Perhaps they missed the prestige and influence of Council membership. Perhaps they were ready to return and help restore order to the chaos their absence had created. The human delegation that entered the chamber bore little resemblance to the small, nervous group that had been expelled 5 years earlier. Ambassador. Chen wore robes of deep blue fabric that seemed to shift and shimmer with embedded technology. Her two companions were equally impressive. One clearly human, the other something that might have been human once but now incorporated technological enhancements that blurred the line between biology and machine. Behind them walked representatives that made several council members gasp in recognition and disbelief. A Pyrothian diplomat whose flame corona burned steady and bright instead of the aggressive flickers typical of his species. A crystalline entity whose formations showed impossible complexity and beauty. A member of the Hive Collective who somehow maintained individual personality while remaining connected to her species' mind. These were species that had never successfully integrated into Council society. Species that had been written off as too alien, too dangerous, or too incompatible for meaningful cooperation. Yet here they stood as equal partners in humanity's delegation. Ambassador Chen, Vextar said, her voice carefully controlled. The Council welcomes your return. Chen smiled, but it was the polite expression of a diplomat addressing foreign dignitaries, not the warmth of a returning colleague. Thank you, Chancellor, though I should clarify. We're not returning, we're visiting. Vextar felt her crystal matrix fluctuate with anxiety. Of course, we understand that formal procedures must be observed. We have prepared a comprehensive proposal for renewed human membership in the Council. That's very kind, but unnecessary. We're quite content with our current arrangements. The simple statement hit the chamber like a physical blow. After years of assuming that humans would eventually request readmission, after months of preparing offers and concessions, the Council was faced with the unthinkable possibility that humanity simply didn't want to return. Perhaps you haven't been fully informed of the benefits of Council membership, suggested Representative Thulmora desperately. Access to advanced technologies, protected trade routes, collective security arrangements. Chen's enhanced companion, who had been introduced as Director Walsh of the Technological Integration Council, spoke for the first time. His voice carried harmonics that suggested significant cybernetic modification. We appreciate the offer, but we've developed our own technologies. As for trade routes and security, our alliance provides superior alternatives. Impossible, declared Dr. Velkana. Council technologies represent the accumulated knowledge of dozens of advanced civilizations. Chen activated a personal holographic projector, displaying images that made the assembled representatives lean forward in amazement. Massive ships that seemed to bend space around themselves, cities floating in the void without visible support structures, terraforming projects that had transformed entire moons into garden worlds in mere months. These are recent developments from our alliance territories, Chen explained casually. We've found that combining human intuition with the unique capabilities of our new partners produces remarkable results. The Pyrothian delegate stepped forward, his flame corona shifting to warm, welcoming colors. I am Fire Singer Kethral, representing the Thermal Dynamics Cooperative. In 5 years of partnership with humans, my people have achieved greater technological advancement than in the previous 5 centuries of isolation. How? Velkana demanded. Humans don't fear our heat. They don't try to contain our fire. They ask us to burn hotter, brighter, in ways our own species never imagined possible. They see our flame not as danger, but as potential. The crystalline entity's formations chimed with musical tones as she spoke. I am harmony of many facets, representing the collective resonance. Humans taught us that individual consciousness and collective awareness could coexist. Our species had believed this was impossible for millennia. Vexitar felt her own crystalline structure resonating with distress. These species had been contacted by the Council repeatedly over the centuries. All attempts at integration had failed, completely. Yet somehow humans had not only succeeded in working with them but had created partnerships that enhanced both sides beyond anything previously thought possible. We've come here today with 2 purposes, Chen continued. First, to formally establish diplomatic relations between the Free Human Worlds Alliance and the remaining Council territories. We're always interested in peaceful cooperation with our galactic neighbors. Hope flickered through the chamber. Diplomatic relations could be the first step toward renewed partnership. Second, Chen said, to offer membership opportunities in the Trans-Species Alliance to any Council species that meet our partnership criteria. Partnership criteria? Vextar asked. Director Walsh activated another holographic display. Prospective members must demonstrate commitment to cooperative problem-solving, willingness to attempt innovative solutions, and ability to work with species they've never encountered before. Applications are evaluated based on contribution, potential, and shared values, not political convenience or historical alliances. The criteria were displayed in clear, simple language, but as the Council representatives read them, they realized with growing horror that most of their species would not qualify. The Alliance valued exactly the traits that the Council had dismissed as chaotic and disruptive. What about our existing territories? Asked General Mortok. Our established systems? Those remain yours, of course, Chen replied. We have no interest in conquest or territorial expansion. Our alliance grows through voluntary membership and mutual benefit. But surely some accommodation could be made, Vextar said, her voice carrying a note of desperation. Some arrangement that would allow Council species to benefit from human innovations while maintaining our traditional structures. Chen's expression remained politely neutral. Chancellor, You made your position clear 5 years ago. You voted unanimously that human methods were incompatible with your civilization. We respected that decision and built something better elsewhere. She gestured to the holographic displays still showing the thriving Alliance territories. Our new partners appreciate what we bring to cooperation. They don't see our emotional bonds as weakness, our willingness to attempt the impossible as disruption, or our refusal to accept limitations as chaos. You could have both, the Pyrothian delegate added, his flames dancing with what looked like amusement. Council membership and alliance partnership, but that would require abandoning the very principles that led to humanity's expulsion. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The council couldn't have the benefits of human innovation while maintaining the rigid order that had defined their civilization. They couldn't access human problem-solving abilities while rejecting human methods as unscientific and chaotic. They had created their own trap, and now they were forced to live in it. Chen checked a timepiece on her wrist. We should conclude our visit. The Alliance Council is meeting tomorrow to discuss applications from 3 new species, and I need to prepare. Wait, Vextar called out as the human delegation prepared to leave. What if the Council were to reconsider its position? What if we formally requested humanity's return? Chen paused at the chamber doors. Chancellor, do you remember what you said during our expulsion hearing? You said that some species are simply incompatible with galactic civilization. I was wrong, Vextar said quietly, and to be